Hey guys. Alright, so I may or may not get some shit for this one. But I wanted to come on here and talk about, I guess, sort of this whole JK Rowling thing. Um, and I guess to sort of reiterate my stance on, like, the trans debate or the trans, I don't know, my opinion on transgenderism and whatnot in general. Because, I have some I don't know. I have some thoughts, and I feel like with the whole transgender thing, I actually think that both sides bring up some good points. I think that, the classified left wing brings up some good points about it, and I think the classified right wing brings up some good points about it. And I say classified because, the left wing, right wing thing, it's got to die at some point. I mean, like, on the one hand, it makes it a little bit simpler to just call people like either left or right. But on the other hand, I mean, there are people who are, self-associated left or right who could have a differing array of opinions on topics, and they may not like exactly align with either the left wing or the right wing or what is considered left wing or right wing. I myself would probably be considered. I mean, by today's standards, I'd probably be considered like maybe like right wing. I don't know. I don't really consider myself right wing or conservative for sure. Definitely not a conservative. Uh, Considering the fact that I don't live a conservative lifestyle, but that's a whole other thing. But, anyways, to get back to the point. But no, when it comes to the transgender debate, I feel like I said, I feel like both sides bring up some good points and some good arguments. Very much like in the abortion debate, I feel that both, liberals and conservatives both bring up some good points and some compelling arguments. Even though I am ultimately pro-choice, at the end of the day, I do think that some conservatives can make some compelling arguments as to why, abortion could be considered like, unethical or whatever. But that's just my opinion. So, the JK Rowling thing, now I'm going to be honest, I don't have a Twitter. I know that's where most of this has gone down on. I was following JK Rowling on Facebook for a long time, and then I think I unfollowed her on Facebook. I was following her on Facebook, but I unfollowed her on Facebook, I think, like last year, when she was sharing something about Nancy Pelosi and was, like, praising Nancy Pelosi and what a great person she is and what a hard... and after that, I was just like, yeah, I think I've had enough. Peace out. Um, no... But the whole J.K. Rowling thing, I guess she's being labeled a TERF or something. If you don't know what a TERF is, I'm sure that most of my audience knows what a TERF is. But if you don't know what that stands for, it's a trans exclusionary radical feminist. Now, J.K. Rowling has been like pretty far left for a long time, for as long as I remember, at least as long as I've kind of sort of been into politics, like quasi sort of. Um, and I know that she's always kind of appealed to, like, the social justice, the more social justice warrior crowd or the more leftist crowd of the world. Um, but it's interesting seeing this turn of events, how she's kind of pitted that crowd of people against her. It is kind of, I can't say it's not satisfying to see that the people that she pandered to all the time turn against her. It is a little bit satisfying seeing her kind of fuck herself over. But at the same time, I mean, I take the accusations very, I take them with a grain of salt because, people throw around labels all the time, throw around someone being, TERF or racist or whatever, like that. I'm not saying it's not true, but at the same time, I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, I guess this is the case now. A friend of mine who is trans, actually, she is a supporter of the channel and whatnot. She shared something on Facebook of, I think it was apparently Rowling sharing like TERF merchandise, something, I forget what it said. I didn't get a close look, but. So I guess J.K. Rowling is a TERF. I don't know. I mean, I know that she's like tweeted that she supports trans people and that she's, that she's fine with them. But I don't know if she's trying to say that, like, biological women and trans women have different experiences, which wouldn't be a false statement. I mean, the way I see it, but, like, I don't know if she's, I mean, again, like the term goes, trans exclusionary radical feminist, so trying to exclude trans women from women's issues or women's rights or whatever. Um, I again, I haven't really followed the whole thing on Twitter because, like I said, I think that's where most of it has went down. But when it comes to JK Rowling, and I know this is kind of rambly. This is going to be a rambly video. This is. I also want to say that this video is going to be based purely on my opinion and my opinions only. It's not going to be an academic video by any means. Not that any of my videos are academic, but you get what I mean. But JK Rowling, the Harry Potter books, like, I know that it's kind of very, very cliche and stereotypical, but the Harry Potter books are always going to have a special place in my heart because they are arguably the books that got me into reading and are the reason why I'm such a voracious reader today. Arguably the Harry Potter books and, like, Goosebumps by R.L. Stine and the Fear Street series or the Goosebumps series, whichever one, both. And like a few other children's books that got me into reading, and I've read the Harry Potter books like multiple times, so it's a very good series. Like I said, it's always going to have a special place with me. And I mean that won't change, but I mean unfortunately, I guess JK Rowling. I've been turned off from JK Rowling for years now. I mean this isn't anything new for me, but I guess this is another thing to add, but. So I guess that's really my stance on J.K. Rowling. I mean, I already thought she was on a cringy road for years now. I mean, ever since, like I said, ever since I sort of got into politics and kind of realized how really far left J.K. Rowling was, I kind of thought she was cringe ever since then. But I mean, so I guess she's even more cringe now that she's apparently a TERF. Apparently, anyways. But as far as, like, the more broad, like, transgender issue, like I said, I think that both sides bring up some compelling arguments and points. However, I almost feel like neither side does a great job at arguing it. I feel like with the right, they point out the suicide rate among the trans community, that it's, like, really high. I think it's, what is it? It's like, I think it's like 54%. Is that what it is? I probably should have looked at this before I filmed this video, I know. But I know it's, like, really high. I think it's like 45% or, like, in the 50s even. But they'll point out the suicide rate in the trans community. And they'll go for the whole, like, being transgender as a mental illness and whatnot. And they kind of focus in on that, as well as, like, and with the suicide rate, they tie in, like, people transitioning medically, and then basically trying to say that, like, a larger chunk of trans people end up committing suicide than not. So therefore, being trans is bad no matter which way you kind of slice it. And, that's... again, they bring up some good points, but at the same time, I think they're too quick to just kind of make a blanket statement about most trans people. Whereas with the left, they do bring up examples of a lot of trans people also medically transitioning and being fine afterwards and being, happy for the most part afterwards. I mean, they'll still have some struggles, of course, but, like, medically transitioning does help them. They also point out that it's probably from social stigma, and I mean it probably is. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, there probably is still today a lot of social stigma. I do feel that some people in the trans community, not all, but some people in the trans community, particularly the ones who bring about all these ridiculous gender identities, sometimes bring it upon themselves, because some people will see these crazy trans people who are identifying as, like, sometimes male, sometimes female, and whatnot, and then as a result, the trans community is viewed as a joke. and and then they end up being like the butt of jokes and whatnot a lot. So people like that in the trans community kind of bring it on themselves. Not all trans people though. Like there's a lot of trans people out there. They're transgender and they're doing the best they can to transition socially and medically as well. And they're just trying to live their lives. And it's like there are a lot of trans people out there like that unfortunately aren't shown in like media and whatnot. It's this like cringe, this like fringe of trans people that are like the most vocal, but they don't actually represent all trans people and whatnot. So it's kind of frustrating. I'm gonna plug in this in really quickly because I think my phone's about to die. But yeah, I feel like maybe that's where some of the social stigma, at least as of today, comes from. And I'm sure it is from some, ignorance and whatnot as well. So, in that sense, I feel like the left does bring up some good arguments and some good points. That when they bring up, again, social stigma, they do have a good point there. Again, I think the right tends to focus a little too much on making a blanket statement about the fact that, all trans people. Well, not all trans people, but like they try to slice it in a way to where it's like a large chunk of trans people who medically transition still aren't happy, so therefore it's a lost cause and whatnot, and so on and so forth. Now with the left, I do think they bring up some good points, like I just pointed out, but I also feel like they have a tendency to kind of just like gloss over the suicide rate. I mean, not gloss over it; they acknowledge it, but they also they want to kind of not focus on that too much, and they want to focus on like the more like positive side and brighter side, and they just want to be like, oh yeah, there are some people who medically transition who aren't satisfied, but most people who do are fine, and they're fine, they're happy and they're fine with it. When that's not the case, but then the right will have you believe that it's the majority, and and sort of the majority, and that's not the case either. So in that sense, I feel like neither side really argues it well, or at least accurately to the best of their respective abilities. I think that there can be like a middle ground when it comes to the trans debate. I feel like you can acknowledge that gender dysphoria, not being trans per se, but gender dysphoria, the thing that the mental condition that brings on being trans, like gender dysphoria itself, is a mental disorder. And see, when people say gender dysphoria is a mental disorder, it depends on what kind of connotations you put on it. There are some people who will say that it's a mental disorder and put on some like demeaning connotations on it, some like malevolent connotations on it, and I guess that becomes more of like a linguistic issue at that point, because the way you phrase things and the way you say things does mean something and can change things. But no, I think you can acknowledge that gender dysphoria is a mental disorder because, I mean, it's the state that, again, brings about someone being trans. They feel like they are born in the wrong body, and that's why they go through all the things of, like, taking either testosterone or hormones and whatnot, and, getting all sorts of surgeries and, transitioning in several different ways to live their life as the gender that they feel that they should be to the best of their ability. So I would say that yes, it is a mental disorder. I don't know if it's still classified in the DSM or in the American Psychiatric Association as a mental illness or disorder, but I would say that to say that it's not a mental disorder is disingenuous. So I think you can acknowledge that it's a mental disorder while still being supportive of trans people and still treating them like human beings and acknowledging that they deserve rights and they shouldn't be discriminated against in the workplace or in a social setting or whatever else. I think that you can acknowledge facts, but still be like empathetic to trans people and still support them and be kind to them. I think that you can kind of have both. Hopefully, I'm making sense. Because I feel like, again, I just the idea that I get is that and it's good to it's. I'm not saying it's bad or anything to point out facts and logic, but I feel like there's little empathy in seeing trans people as human beings on the right. They're good, like they point out the facts and some of the logic. Well, I should say some of the facts and some of the logic with trans people that is legitimate. but they kind of forget, they don't have a lot of empathy exactly. Maybe empathy in the sense that they feel like that, people with gender dysphoria shouldn't transition medically, and they feel like it's letting people mutilate their own bodies. Like, people are just letting trans people mutilate their own bodies. At least some people on the right would say that. Uh, but in that sense, there's empathy. But just like there's not as much empathy for trans people on the right, but there's more kind of just pointing out the cold, hard, like, facts and whatnot. Whereas on the left, I mean, there is a lot of empathy and treating trans people as human beings as they should be treated. But they also want to gloss over kind of like the elephant in the room, like, facts and whatnot. That's how I see it. Again, this is all purely my opinion and what I've gotten from, like, more left-wing speakers on trans things and more right-wing speakers on trans things and issues. And I just feel like there can be a middle ground. Like, I feel like there's either one side or the other side to trans stuff, and I feel like there can be a middle ground. Like I said, I think you can acknowledge, the stuff about the suicide rate and the fact that there are, enough to be realized. There's enough trans people to where it should be brought to the attention that medically transitioning sometimes does not work, so there should be other solutions and other treatments should be pursued. But I also feel like you can acknowledge that there are also a lot of other trans people who are happy and that medically transitioning does work for them, and they do end up being more happier as a result. It doesn't completely disappear, of course. I mean, they're still going to suffer with it, but they're a lot more happier than they would have been otherwise. Hopefully I'm making sense. I feel like there can be some middle ground. I feel like you can acknowledge all the good points of the right and the left, and sort of come to like a position where you can support trans people and their rights and see them as human beings as they should be seen, while also further research into gender dysphoria is done and whatnot, and to see if there's any other solutions. Again, because I can't imagine what it's like to live with gender dysphoria and what it's like to feel like you were born to the wrong body and feeling that you aren't like the right gender. It makes me thankful it makes me thankful that I'm only gay. Like, it makes me thankful to be just that. Like, I could never imagine. And I don't say that in like a disrespectful way. I'm not saying like, well, at least I'm not these people over here. Like, I'm not saying it like that. I'm just saying that it's crazy to me, just the experience and how difficult it must be to go through that and to be born with that. That's all I'm saying. But if there was a way to where, and I have to be careful about how I say this, but if there was a way to where trans people, could have their gender dysphoria alleviated in other ways aside from having to, medically transition, getting surgeries and whatnot, I mean, I feel like that would be good. And again, I'm not, look, I'm just saying that in terms of it would just be good so that way trans people wouldn't have to suffer any longer. That's all I'm saying. I know it can be easily taken out of context and spun as like I'm saying that trans people should be eradicated or whatever, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that if there was a way, an alternate way that we could come to with further research to where people could have their gender dysphoria alleviated in some other way to where they wouldn't have to spend a bunch of money on medical transition and whatnot and go through all this bullshit, I think that would be good. It would ease a lot of suffering in the world for trans people. But until then, if we ever do get to that, until then, I feel like again we can acknowledge the cold, not very romantic facts, as well as again not forgetting to empathize and treat trans people as human beings and whatnot, and realize that they are people who didn't choose to have what they're born with, and that all we can do is just support them to the best of our ability and try to empathize with them, while also recognizing that some of these more crazy trans people don't represent every single trans person. There's a lot of trans people on YouTube who are pretty reasonable. obviously the biggest example would be Blair White, although I I don't know. I've been kind of disappointed in her recently. I feel like her large following has kind of went to her head, but that's a whole different video. I'm still sub to her. I still enjoy her from time to time, but Blair White is kind of the more stereotypical example. There's tons. I mean, there's Miss London, Ella Grant, Rose of Dawn is a really good one I've been getting into. There's also people like Calvin Guerra, Storm Ryan, Sam Collins, among others, who are pretty reasonable generally. So, from what I've seen, so there's a lot of trans people who are just trying to live their lives. They're just normal people trying to live their lives. And I guess it's another thing about when you get with the more right-wing pundits is that when they, just another point, and then I'll try to wrap this up because this is 20 minutes already, but with right-wing pundits, some right-wing pundits, I should say, not all, but some, they will like say that being trans is not normal and that it's abnormal. And again, this is where kind of how you phrase things matters, because again, you can acknowledge that being trans is outside of the norm, which it is. I mean, I think trans people make up like what? I think it's like, I don't think it's even 1%, like it's like 0.5 or something, like 0.5% of the population. I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that encompasses like the entire world or just the US, but I know it's like a pretty small percentage of the population. So from a numbers sense and from a statistical sense, like yes, trans people, it is outside of the norm to be trans. However, you can also say it's not normal in a demeaning way and in a way that adds negative connotations to it. So you could, like if you say, well, it's just being trans, it's not normal, it's abnormal. I mean, it all depends on how you say things and how you phrase things, okay? You can say that in a way that puts all sorts of negative connotations on trans people. And you can also say it in a way that's not having any like political bias. It's just stating, it's just a matter of fact statement, just saying, yeah, well, I mean, being trans, it's not with the norm, it's not in terms of numbers and whatnot. It's like myself, I'm gay. Like being gay is outside of the norm because a majority of people are straight, but being gay would be considered abnormal in the sense that it doesn't align with the majority of people. Now, if you say that it's abnormal in the sense that where you add negative connotations and whatnot, that's a whole different story. So again, how you say things and language, means something. So that's just another point that I kind of wanted to bring up. But so hopefully you've gotten something out of this rambly 23-minute video at this point. And hopefully I'm not coming off the wrong way. I wanted to come on here because I've had these thoughts in my mind for a while, and I wanted to come on here and just kind of try to bridge the gap, I guess, because there's a Raven. Sorry, my cat's kind of messing around with the phone, but anyways, I just wanted to try to like bridge the gap between this whole debate. Now, I know that I'm not anyone on the internet, but like I'm not any huge entity or whatnot. I'm no intellectual mastermind or whatever. But I just want to come on here and like I said, try to bridge the gap and try to give credit and credence to both sides when it comes to this debate. Ultimately, though, if you want my position on trans people, just as a brief summary, I'm fine with trans people. I honestly, I don't care. I don't care if someone is trans or not. If they want to medically transition, I know it costs a lot of money, so a lot of trans people can't immediately medically transition, like with the surgeries and whatnot. So they have to the only thing they can really do is try to, I guess, transition socially. And again, I'm fine with that. As long as the person has, because people even try to argue that you don't, have to have gender dysphoria to be trans, which is crazy to me, because it's like, what's even the point then? That'd be like me coming on here and saying, hey guys, you don't have to have same-sex attraction to be gay. I mean, that's just, what's the point then? But that's, again, I don't want to drag this video out for another 10 minutes, so anyways, I guess I could just say I'm pretty libertarian on the issue. I mean, if a trans person is trans and they have gender dysphoria and they transition medically in the pursuit of their own happiness, I encourage that. I support that. Um, you know, don't be a dick to trans people. Treat them as human beings, 'cause that's what they are. They can't help what they're born with and whatnot. Um, you know, that's my position, anyways. So that's going to be it for this one. I'm finally going to wrap this up. So let me know what you guys think. Peace, and have a good day.